Just link in. Okay, good. This afternoon, we're going to look at some of the practical aspects of managing the dairy cow in relation to her feed needs, what she needs to be fed. So that will take most of the afternoon, and then we'll have a quick look at sheep afterwards. What I have on the slides is some of the theory, you know, lots of graphs and things like that. But, you know, hopefully we can discuss as well the practical aspects of cattle feeding. But I wanted to relate it really to their welfare circumstances. So we will concentrate quite a bit on, you know, provision of fiber, provision of energy, things like that. And then tomorrow we'll look at some rationing plans. How to ration cattle in terms of energy and minerals. Protein, probably talk about it, but the actual protein rationing is quite complicated, so I don't think we're going to do that. And then the last day we'll look at assessment of welfare in goshalas with Utah a bit, after I've done some fundamental considerations of how we assess welfare, and then we'll talk about feeding the world. Small topic. That'll be the last sort of discussion topic that we have. So what I want to do with our major session this afternoon is to describe the main characteristics of dairy cow production. Now, I'm going to be giving you quite a lot of the information which has been described for Western cows. And I'm aware that in India you have some cows that perform at this level, you know, several thousand litres every lactation. But you also have a lot of cows which are performing at much lower levels. But because most of the documentation relates to the higher yielding cows, we'll focus a bit on those. But the principles, I think, will be the same. If they're not, do tell me. Just saying, Dr. Prasenjit, we're focusing this afternoon on management of the dairy cow. That'll take about 2/3 of the time, a little bit on sheep feeding at the end, depending on people's interests a bit as well. So we're going to describe the main characteristics of dairy cow production, comparing high and low yielding units and feeding methods for those. Look at how feeding varies over the year, particularly as plant growth varies, and see how the reproduction of the cow fits in with her production cycle. So I hope, you know, you'll all get a good picture of how the more intensive dairy units work on a pretty well annual cycle. I know we were talking this morning about, you know, milking cows for 15 months or so, but I'm going to focus on the units where production is squashed into, you know, a 12 or 13 month cycle, which happens on the more intensive units. Let's compare two dairy systems. So one of them is intensive, and one of them is extensive. And I'm taking us around the world to Italy for this this comparison, because there you have side by side almost some very intensive systems in the Po Valley, for instance, and you have in the Alpine regions some very extensive systems. So I think it's an interesting contrast, and it will show some principles, I think, which are well over and above, you know, just feeding the dairy cow, which is important. So in terms of the size of the units, our mountain unit would typically be smaller, some 25 cows kept on 27 hectares, whereas in the lowland we're probably looking at keeping probably 2 cows for every 1 hectare of land. In the hill land, just 1. So this is what we call a stocking density. The yields from the cows are higher in the more intensive units on the lowland, because the quality of their forage is better. They can grow grasses better. Whereas in the mountains, they can't grow grass as well. They will have to supplement with concentrates. So they might be feeding, to achieve these relatively high milk yields, they might be feeding perhaps 2 tons of concentrates every year, over 2 tons. Thanks, Prasenjit. Yeah, thank you. That might seem a very high amount to you. That's sort of on a 300-day lactation, that is 2,000 kilos over 300 days is about 7 or 8 kilos per day. 7 kilos a day. Is that a lot of concentrates for you to feed to a cow in one day? That's a lot. Yeah, okay, well that's what they will do. The highest production systems in Europe will feed 3 tons of concentrates per day, so 10 kilos per cow per day. So massive amount of concentrates. And that's why the milk yields for those highest production units might well be 7,000 or 8,000 litres. If you go to the highest average milk yields around the world, about 10,000 litres per year. 10,000 litres per year. So that's on average 30 litres per day. At peak lactation, the cows will give 60 litres.
How does, for example, I think a traditional Indian cow, it produces much less milk?
10 litres a day if they're doing well.
Right.
Yeah.
So I mean, with the feed, this amount of feed, will it increase the productivity of milk?
Yeah, yeah, because they're using racing cars to do it. The Holstein Friesian cow, you know, that's your racing cow. It's genetically programmed to produce huge amounts of milk, much more than the calves need. Yeah, so they can do it, and particularly the American breeds. So you have the Dutch Friesian, is quite a small cow, maybe 450 kilos, bigger, you know, much bigger than your cows, but still 450 kilos. 450 kilo cow. I saw some photographs. Yeah.
Not more than 150. हमारी next generation है breed after breeding, that's not more than 250 months. पर जो सब मेरा experience है कि अगर हम अपनी cows को feed बढ़ाते हैं तो उनकी production बढ़ती है. Actually क्या है कि हमारे farmers जो local गाय थी हिमाचल में, जो शिमला में local गाय थी, वो उसको सूखा घास ही खिलाते थे. जिन दिनों वो ग्रीनरी नहीं होती है तो घास only सूखा घास.
So what it says is that if you increase the feed for even these cows, he has, they produce more milk.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, the excess feed is only dried grass. So it probably concentrate is something else than just dried grass.
Yeah, concentrate will be based on cereals, based.
Nutrients देते हैं, nutrients concentrates. जो पहाड़ी गाय है उसको तो maximum 1 kg है, 2 kg per day.
Yeah. It could be.
उसकी जो produce है 2 किलो से 4 किलो तक आई है, maximum 5 किलो.
In the European systems, a concentrate will typically be based on cereal grains plus soya meal for protein, maybe some oilseed cakes, PKC, in small amounts because it's expensive, and then minerals and vitamins added, and it's all made into a pellet.
हम जो है grains use करते हैं, जो oil cake.
Various types of grains.
Yes.
And oil cakes.
Oil cake.
Yeah.
And something like that. Taramira, we call it taramira. Digestive.
Okay. Digestion additive. Well, a lot of the digestion additives. Yeah.
Like a mustard
Rumen
seed.
protected.
Okay. Yeah.
Rumen protected protein.
Yeah. Okay. Mustard seed was that, or?
Similar to, I think sarso is similar to a mustard seed.
Okay. So it's naturally protected.
Like cotton seed.
Yes.
Is rumen protected.
Will the cows at those production levels need rumen protected protein? No. Right. Yes. You're obviously well up on the protein nutrition. Yeah. Yes. But it'll still be utilized as bypass protein, so it's not wasted, I guess. But it's an expensive product. Yeah. Okay. Now, well, so the point of my putting this slide up is actually, it's an interesting one. So feeding a lot more concentrates to get those yields in the mountainous region, but here the labor utilization, 2.4 people in the mountain, 3.5 in the lowland. And the concentrate cost here for the 2 units, we've got a certain price for the mountain system, more expensive in concentrates than the lowland system, and the labor cost here higher. Sorry, these two should be the other way around, 3.5 in the mountain, 2.5 in the lowland. That was the point of my putting the slide up, because the mountain system can actually supply work, can supply employment for a larger number of people. Even though the output is less, it's still a beneficial outcome to provide work for somebody, I think. Yeah, and the products, the mountainous product may well be sold at a premium. So they have a lot of accreditation schemes in Italy and in France, which will require the production of high quality cheeses to only be done in this sort of traditional system. And so they can sell the product at a great premium, Parmigiana cheese or something like that. Those opportunities may not arise here, but interesting comparison. Okay, this is a really fundamental graph, I think, for any dairy cow producer. It shows how over the course of the lactation, so here we have a 10-month lactation, okay, from 0 to 10 months, that's the lactation. So milk yield is here. Milk yield builds up to a peak and then it declines. Sorry. Milk yield building up to a peak and then it declines. And then we usually dry the cow off so it goes down to nothing. And following that is dry matter intake. So this is the intake of the cow. And dry matter, you notice dry matter intake reaches a peak at about just before mid-lactation, about 4.5 months. Okay? Whereas milk yield reaches a peak at about 2 months. And so there's an energy deficit. Here we have a big energy deficit. And the cow, of course, meets that need by losing body fat. So she will lose 50 to 100 kilos in this period because she has an energy deficit.
Negative energy balance.
Yeah, that's right. And it's not until, if we look at body weight, here she is losing 50 to 100 kilos in that early lactation period, and then she has to put that on in the later stages of lactation and then in the dry period. And the management of the cow in this dry period is really important because she has to be given the right feed to put on that energy, restore that body condition. The cows actually put on energy, put on fat tissue more efficiently in this late lactation period than they do here. We did talk earlier about calcium nutrition, and one of the important things in this dry period is to give the cow a low calcium diet so that she starts to mobilize calcium in this last period, so that when it comes to this massive increase in milk yield in early lactation, she doesn't get hypocalcemia or milk fever, which is basically is likely to hit in the first week. It's usually in the first week, often on the first day of lactation. Not enough calcium. The cow goes down and can die if you don't get calcium into. If the vet doesn't get calcium into her very quickly, she can die. And that's a function of this build up to 20 to 40 liters per day, typically. Now your cows, some of them are not giving as much milk, but some, Indian dairy production is intensifying very rapidly, and you will have cows that are following this model increasingly. And the biggest welfare challenges to the dairy cow happen here at this time of peak production because of this deficit. So the cow is being predisposed to a number of diseases. Acidosis, because there's a temptation to feed too much. Metabolic diseases in this first 2 months of lactation, a lot of metabolic diseases.
Main transition period.
Yes. So which metabolic diseases?
Ketosis.
Laminitis.
Acidosis.
Yeah.
Then, abanism shift.
Yes. So let's go to them one by one. Ketosis, that's because the cow is losing body fat too quickly. And you can smell in the cow's breath, you can smell ketone bodies, like a sweet smell, pear drops. Sometimes you go into a dairy unit, I don't know whether you probably wouldn't have found this in your study, you two, but you can go into a dairy unit and you smell, it's like pear drops everywhere, and it's the cow's breath. And Dr. Prasenjit is saying, how can I detect that with my physics? Yes. People are working on that, I know. Yeah. So ketosis, acidosis, because we feed too much concentrates, and the rumen quickly produces volatile fatty acids, acidifies the rumen, and that leads to that laminitis. We looked at the etiology of laminitis, how laminitis happens. We looked at that the other day, and a lot of it is due to this diet of silage and concentrates, which is digested too quickly, acid conditions in the rumen. And then we have fatty liver disease, mobilization of fat too quickly, and that can stop the cow reproducing properly. And we have displaced abomasum as well, is another potential problem. So quite a big raft of, a big number of metabolic diseases will challenge the cow at this time. So this is, you know, it's a really important graph, I think. It shows how the cows work, that your high-yielding cows work, and this deficit here is a problem. There has been a lot of interest in the past as, is it better to try and what we call steam up your cows, to give them a lot of concentrates beforehand, before they calve here on a 12-month basis? Or is it better to try and get them to eat more in this early lactation period? If you encourage them to eat more, then actually the milk is coming straight from the food. If it's going from food to body fat to milk, it's less efficient. But you can get higher milk yields that way. The worst thing is if you have a thin cow calving down, let's say condition score 3, it's quite thin. If she calves down then, she hasn't got a lot of body fat to support that milk production in early lactation, and then milk yields would be quite low. So it is better to try and encourage the cows to get fat during this dry period, but not too fat. If they get too fat, then you have problems of calving, dystocia. You know, the calf is too big to come out, and so the cow will be straining, and she may have to have a cesarean section. So you don't want them to become too fat. And in terms of condition score, not over 4. You remember when we talked about condition score, I said one of those critical factors was if you got creases underneath the pin bones. These are the pelvic bones here. If they got creases of fat underneath, then that's condition score 4+, and you don't want too high a level of condition score. In addition, we have to think about getting the cow back in calf, getting her ready to support her next calf. And if this graph is a bit different, supposing the dry matter intake doesn't increase fast enough, and because the diet is too poor, and her body weight doesn't start increasing, because this is a generalized graph. If say a cow doesn't increase their body weight at this time, and it's much harder to get her in calf, much harder that she would conceive. So what are the indicators of that? Well, the two main indicators are body condition score again. If she's below 2, then hard to get her in calf. And if her milk protein content is less than about 26 grams per kilogram, or 2.6%, hard to get her in calf. You put those two together and you find those cows with body condition score less than 2, milk protein content is low, very hard to get her in calf. And that's because cows conceive much better when they're gaining weight, just like sheep. You know, we may not get a chance to talk about it with sheep, but if you want to get more lambs out of a sheep, you make sure you feed her really well at the time when you're serving her. And even if it's only for about 5 to 10 days, the sheep is much more likely to have multiple lambs if she's being fed well. The reproductive hormones start increasing when the food intake starts improving. Okay. Let's have a little comparison then of you know, what is it best for a dairy herd to aim for? High or low yields? So this is again considering it from a sort of holistic perspective, a rounded perspective. Very often farmers will only think of maybe that one, that one, that one. You know, they won't look at the whole picture. So when we're looking before mountain versus lowland, I wanted us to try and see the whole picture, including labour use, and how important it is to provide employment for people on dairy farms. Okay, so our high-yielding cows on the right-hand side, are they more efficient? Well, here's our food intake, say 25 kilograms of dry matter per day. Now let's imagine that the dry matter content is about 20%. So we have to multiply this by 5. She's eating about 100 kilograms, 120 kilograms of fresh weight material per day. That's a huge amount of food. The low yielding cows perhaps yielding 30 litres a day compared with 50 litres a day. So we're looking here at really high yielding cows. The low yielding cows will be eating obviously less than that. Water consumption, a lot, generally for every litre of milk that a cow is producing, she needs to drink 5 litres of water. So that's a huge amount of extra water. Come in, Kushbu. Yeah. That's a huge amount of water needed. And if the cows are only fed water at milking times, it's not enough. They can't get enough water into their system. In terms of the composition, then generally the lower yielding cows will have higher fat contents. So you're not getting the full benefit of extra milk yields because the fat is reduced. Now, in many Western systems of production, farmers are not paid much for their milk fat that they're producing. They're paid on protein, a little bit for fat, and that's probably different here. Farmers paid for fat and protein, or solids not fat?
Oh, yeah, SNS.
Okay, so that's lactose plus protein. So the milk has 3 main solids in it, fat, protein and lactose. In addition to that, it has minerals and vitamins. Fat percentage is usually about 3.5 to 4%, protein is usually about 2.5 to 3%, and lactose is about 4.5%. The lactose doesn't change very much. The protein does change quite a bit. It changes with the level of nutrition. If a cow is well nourished, her milk protein is good, her blood protein is good, her milk protein is good. And the fat content, that will reflect mainly most variable, and it's mainly reflecting the fiber intake. So if a cow has good fiber intake, she is converting the fiber into fat.
In India, the high-fat milk is the most expensive.
Right, yes, yeah. It's the most nutritious, yeah. But in the West, often milk fat is not valued as much as protein. Protein is good for the cheese, of course. Yeah. Okay, other things we have to take into consideration. The high-yielding cows are producing a lot more feces. That's got to be removed. Now, in the West, feces would usually be considered a waste product that has to be got rid of. But here you might use it for biogas production, for drying, for burning, and for sterilizing the floor and things like that. Well, not sterilizing, but good bacteria. So a number of uses. So that has to be considered. And then the amount of urine, of course, is higher. And usually your high-yielding cows, they are bigger cows. So we have to consider, is this cow, our high-yielding cow, necessarily more efficient? Well, she is more efficient, but she's not that much more efficient because she's a bigger cow. And so we should consider perhaps some breeds of cow that are quite small but give a relatively high milk yield, like the Jersey. So here we've got Friesian cattle, Holstein Friesian cattle, 670 kilos. That's twice the weight, more than twice the weight, more than twice the weight of one of your cows. The reason that the West has produced these enormous great cows is because they're very, there's less labor involved. So everything in the West, I think, is geared towards low labor input. Mechanization, and bigger cows. It takes 10 minutes to milk a cow, well, 5 or 6 minutes to milk a cow. It takes the same amount of time to milk this high-yielding cow as it does to milk the low-yielding cow. And you've got nearly twice as much milk. And so the labor input is much less for these really big cows. Everything in the West is focused on minimizing labor input. Anyway, there's some sociopolitics there which I won't go into. Okay. What happens as a cow gets older? So here we've got a first lactation cow. This is a heifer. We call it a heifer. First lactation cow has a very flat lactation curve. As she gets older, her milk yield gets higher and higher in the early period of lactation, and then she falls off more suddenly. The implications of that is that your older cow is going to have a much bigger energy deficit. You've probably all seen those old cows in the dairies that have not an ounce of fat on them, no fat on them at all. They're not, well, they're still producing a lot of milk. They're relatively efficient, but they're very prone to those metabolic diseases which I talked about earlier. This energy deficit is huge, and if we think that energy deficit is a welfare problem because of all the metabolic diseases, then these are the cows that are going to get them. And that's why in some Western production systems, the cows only last on average 2 lactations. Considering that those Bosgaras cows that I showed you a couple of days ago, their average lifespan will be 25 years. It's a chronic waste of cows, chronic waste of animals, and of course they have to be supported by additional animals coming into the herd. And if they're only lasting 2 years, you need many more what we call followers to replace those cows. Chronic waste of life. But that's how it works in Western systems. Average in intensive Western dairy production systems would be less than 3 lactations. Worst systems in Holland, just over 2. So really bad. And these cows are calving at 2 years of age. They are dead by the time they're 4 years of age, compared with natural lifespan of 25. That's on average.
And where does the meat get used? Clearly not for beef.
Yeah, some will be beef. Beef pies. Yeah. So it's not absolutely wasted. The lower quality cuts will probably go for dog meat. Of course, in the integrated European systems where beef production is integrated with milk production, then the carcass of the dairy animal is of relatively low value cuts. It's not, so what we have around the world, of course, is some integrated systems. In Europe, you've got beef, cattle production and dairy production system. It's absolutely integrated. So your calves, some of the dairy cows are served with a beef bull, and you get a crossbreed which is used for beef production, particularly the males. The females, to replace the Friesian cows in the herd, they come from purebred servings. So the first servings in the herd are usually purebred with a Friesian. And then the later cows that are being bred, they are bred to a beef bull, because you don't want the herd to slip out of a 12-month cycle. The average time from calving to calving is about 13 months. If it goes too long, 13 or 14 months, then it doesn't fit in with the cycle. I'll talk more about that later on. Now these young cows, the heifers, they still are immature. They need to be still gaining weight. And over the lactations, from first to second to third to fourth to fifth lactation, the cows need to put on about 60 kilos or so. So in addition to restoring body weight up to what it was beforehand, those young cows have got to put on another 50 or 60 kilos. So that puts a lot of pressure on those young animals to be gaining weight in the late lactation and dry period. A lot of pressure. And yet so often on dairy farms, the dry cows, these ones here, they're just shoved around the back of the farm. They're not looked after properly. Whereas all the milking cows, obviously, they're coming into the milking parlour every day. So the farmer sees what they're like. The dry cows are just left to get on with their own thing. But they're really important. Okay. So this is similar to the one we had before, but it shows the changes in body condition rather than weight. That in the early lactation period, the body condition is used for milk production, then it is regained, and then it becomes constant. So we're aiming for a body condition of about 3 at calving. So this here is about a body condition score of 3, goes down to about 2. This is on a 1 to 5 scale. Responses to energy intake in terms of as we increase the energy intake, and we're talking about metabolizable energy here, energy that can be metabolized by the cow. As we feed the cow more and more energy, initially some of it is used for extra milk yield, but then later it is used for increase in live weight. So we can't just keep piling energy into the cow. A bit like your question earlier, someone said, you know, can we get more milk from the cow if we put more energy in? Well, you can if your level of energy intake is quite low. But if the level of energy intake is high, if you're already feeding 7 or 8 kilos per cow, then you're not going to get any extra milk from the cow. She's just going to get fatter.
Actually, what I meant was, why I asked the question was, there must be some genetic predisposition towards production of milk.
Yeah.
So you may feed in energy, but that will actually go waste. Is that a rational thing to say?
It is. Yes, it won't be totally wasted. It'll go into body fat, and then it'll be used later on or next lactation. But that is a more wasteful process. You know, you cannot destroy energy, of course. That's a fundamental rule of life. So it will be used for body tissue growth. The digestion of the feedstuffs is not affected a great deal by whether you're operating here or whether you're operating here. So the efficiency of digestion is fairly constant. It's going to happen. About 2/3 of it will be retained. The rest comes out in feces. Okay. So what about getting the cow back in calf? We've been talking about 12-month cycles, and this just shows that if the cycle goes much beyond 12 months, then the milk production begins to fall. Milk production per cow per year, the milk production begins to fall. So farmers like to get their cows back in calf so that they will have an annual cycle. as I say, on average, the cycle is about 385 days. So farmers are operating around here. They could be operating up here if they could get their cows back in calf earlier. And that's because a cow operating here, she'll only lactate for about, well, she'll only be allowed to lactate for about 300 days. I mean, you can keep them lactating more, up to about 18 months, I think. And the reason that farmers like to keep them within 12 months is because they have that annual cycle. It's beneficial to do all the jobs to the cows at one time, so they all start calving together. The farmer can be looking out for signs of calving. They're all being served in estrus together. They're all being dried off together. Maybe the farmer has a bit of a holiday after they're all dried off. That's how it works in places like New Zealand, where most of the milk is being used for manufacturing rather than for liquid consumption. Of course, if you're aiming for a liquid market, then you need cows milking all the year round, and you need to have cows, calving all the year round. But if it's primarily for manufacturing, then you're quite likely to block the calving.
So in the Indian context, you would like to have liquid all year.
Right. Yes. So then you would follow a sort of pattern where you're milking all the year round. But in a manufacturing condition, like in Ireland, for example, you might well block the calving into perhaps the autumn months, block the calving here, and then, or you'd block it into the spring months here, and then there's lots of grass available when the cows are very high yielding in early lactation. So there are reasons to block the calf. Now the modern dairy cow, of course, is not seasonally reproductive. She will calve, she will reproduce all year round, basically. But the old traditional cows, the Bos primigenius cows, they would be more likely to conceive in the autumn months here, ready to give birth 9 months later in late spring, so that there's lots of grass available for the calves and for the cows to produce milk. Makes sense. But we've bred that out of cows. They will conceive any time now.
So why does the type of market change its strategy? I don't understand why you're okay to stop production if it's all going into manufacture.
Because you don't need liquid milk all year round. If you don't need liquid milk all year round, you can afford to stop manufacturing for 2 or 3 months of the year. And of course the factories would prefer to keep going, but if you've got a strong liquid demand, you have to have cows milking all year round.
Is there a welfare issue? You're forcing the cow to stop producing milk?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Yes, there is. I think on these really high yielding herds, if we go back to our 50-litre cows, these cows are being dried off when they're producing 20 litres of milk. Pretty painful for the cow, it's obvious. And then people ask the question, is it better to suddenly stop milking the cow, or maybe milk her once a day for 2 weeks, then once every other day, and gradually wind it down? And yeah, I'm not sure what would be best from a welfare perspective. Probably the gradual process. But definitely there is a welfare issue with these really high yielding cows. And some people are asking the question, okay, why are we only milking them for 300 days? Why don't we milk them for 15 months, like your cow, I think?
उसका छोड़ना है तो उसके लिए स्टार्टिंग में तो हम पहले एक टाइम छोड़ते हैं, उसके बाद फिर एक दिन छोड़कर फिर आहिस्ता आहिस्ता छोड़ते हैं।
They do it gradually.
Okay.
So they drop it to once a day, and then they miss a day, and then 2 days. Like
Yeah, yeah, yeah. The pain is caused by intramammary pressure, because after about 8 hours, intramammary pressure begins to build up quite significantly. That's why we can actually get more milk out of a cow if we milk her 3 times a day compared with twice a day. Normally cows are milked twice a day on something like a 16-8 interval. So let's say from 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and then they'll be milked 16 hours later at 7 o'clock in the morning. And then there's an 8-hour interval, and then they're milked again. We know that in the overnight period, intramammary pressure builds up so much that it does begin to stop milk production. Whereas if they're milked 3 times a day, you'll get an extra 10–15% of milk. Some intensive systems actually just hire a person to come in and milk at midnight, have an extra milking. Of course, nowadays in some of the more advanced Western systems, we have automatic milking machines. Have you heard of those? Yeah. So, sorry?
Automatic milking machines are here as well.
Are here. Okay.
Both the rotary, the milking parlors plus the portable machines, both of them.
Right.
Is
So,
it something else that you're talking about?
the one in the milking parlour for a long time, cluster removal has been automated. When the milk flow goes past a certain below a certain level, then the vacuum is sensed and the cluster is removed by a string. And in the last 20 years, there has been a lot of development of robots which will automatically put the clusters, the teat cups, the 4 teat cups, onto the cow's udder. You have those here?
No, I haven't seen those.
Okay. They're big robots. They're very, very expensive. They're used mainly in countries such as Denmark, where you have an elderly population. So basically the farmer doesn't have to milk his cows anymore. The cows come into a little room, and the robot senses the heat of the udder, and so moves the cluster up. An arm comes out, moves the cluster up underneath the cow's udder. It then has a photographic memory of where the teats are for each cow, and boom, they go up onto the teats. It's very clever, but it's hugely expensive.
On this, what we are discussing, I was just wondering, like, when the cow is given a time off during the dry period, isn't it like a good thing for her, because it's giving her a break from continuous cycle of birth and milking?
Yes, yes, but they only get a month off or 6 weeks off. Yeah, yeah. So if you think of a racehorse, they have to be spelled every now and then. They get worn out, don't they? And they have to be spelled. You know, you put them out to pasture for a month or two to recover. Well, we don't give our cow much opportunity to do that.
Yeah, in the traditional Indian milk production system, that used to be the practice.
Oh,
so
sorry.
after every calving or every milk cycle,
Right.
especially the buffaloes in the peri-urban areas, used to be sent out to villages for
Yeah.
for a certain duration of time, because it was not possible to give a natural environment at the periphery of the city, so they would go to villages where they
Okay.
would be taken out for grazing, and when they are again impregnated, after
Yeah.
that they will return to the dairy.
So a very long cycle. How long would that period in the villages be?
It would be a couple of months.
Yeah, yeah,
But
okay.
it's no longer a practice now. It used to be
Right.
like 20 years back.
Because if they're not impregnated till then, you're sure they were impregnated then, because then they wouldn't calve for another 9 months.
Yeah. So once they go to the village, they're given a break for
Yeah.
maybe for 15 days or a month or something.
Yeah.
For a month, and then maybe they're impregnated. But while they're pregnant, they're still in the villages and free to move around
Right.
and experience the natural
Yeah.
And once they are, I think, close to calving or they're in milk, they get back to the dairies.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So that's another 9 months later. Yeah. Long period. Long break. But it's like, you know, your land. You can't keep flogging your land. They say you can't keep taking crops off your land without putting something back in. And often you rest the land for a year to allow it to recover. It's the same with the dairy cow. But typically she will only have 2 months to recover, and then she's back into this cycle. And this is why some people, some of the scientists say that the dairy cow has the worst welfare of any farm animal. Worse even than the, you know, the battery cage hen that we talked about yesterday.
So where in this is she impregnated then? Where
About here. Yeah. She will be, she'll start, her first estrus will be about 40 days, 40 to 60 days after calving. So cows don't show a lactational anestrus like pigs. You know, cows will come back into estrus when they're lactating. So very often the herdsman or woman will not serve the cow first time. They'll serve them second time and thereon. And he's only, to maintain a 12-month cycle, he or she only has 1 or 2 chances, because the estrus cycle is 30 days. And she has to be, the cow has to be pregnant again to calve at 12 months. She has to be pregnant at 3 months. So he's really only got 1 chance. If she starts cycling again at 6 weeks of 6 weeks after calving, he's got 1 or 2 chances to get her pregnant. And this is why one of the biggest problems with the high-yielding dairy cows is that they're not getting pregnant.
what happens to them then?
They'll get culled, and that's another reason why they're only lasting 2 lactations in the herd, because they don't get pregnant till here. So they're going to calve down here, and in our block calving pattern, you know, supposing they're block calving like that, the farmer wants them to calve here, and she's going to calve here. No, sorry, she goes. And so they're chronic wastage. You know, a very inefficient system, but very efficient use of labor, very efficient use of feed, very inefficient use of animals. And perhaps somewhat unethical. I don't know. It depends on your ethics. So if, you know, in India you're adopting intensive production systems like this, you can see some of the problems that they bring. You know, it's like a Formula 1 race, and a lot of cars drop out. Well, a lot of cows drop out as well. So it brings a lot of problems. Okay. Yeah, we won't bother with that. Let's talk about grazing systems, shall we? Because we're here to talk about nutrition. There's lots of different ways of allocating pasture land to the cows. We can put all the cows on all of the land all of the time if we want. Okay? It's not a bad system. The cows get to choose the best grass, but the grass never gets a chance to recover, really. So some farmers start rotating the cows around the grass. So rotational grazing system, splitting the land up into paddocks and moving the cows from one to the other. And that means the farmer has more control. It also means that if you have a mixed pasture, supposing you have some legumes in your pasture and some grasses, well, the cows like eating the legumes. They're high in nitrogen. They will, in this system, they may eat out all the legumes. They'll eat all the legumes and they don't get a chance to recover. Whereas in this system, they are able to recover. All good? Yeah.
They're asking about legumes.
Yes. Yeah, nitrogen fixing plants. like beans, soya beans, or yeah, clovers. You probably have, you have clovers here, I'm sure. Alexandrinum, berseem clover. Yeah, berseem, yeah.
Cherry.
Very high quality. They are prone to causing bloat, of course, so yeah, we can talk more about that later. Right. Okay, we're nearly at 2, so I'm going to wrap up on this slide. Shall I, Dr. Prasenjit?
If Azolla is a good feed.
Azolla. Yes, I've seen Azolla growing in South America, a water weed, of course. It's a very efficient growing plant. I don't know it. I mean, because it's a water plant, the level of structural carbohydrate is low. You know, why do plants get woody? Because they need to support themselves when they get very tall. You know, that's why trees are so woody. Well, the cows are designed to consume structural carbohydrates like that. So the rumen is full of microorganisms that can digest cellulose. And even when the cellulose is bonded to lignin is really tough material in the wood. It can digest that. Other animals can't do that. Whereas in a water plant like Azolla, you have no need for any support, and so there's no fiber in it. So Azolla is like feeding, you know, really leafy spinach or something. There's no fiber. It'll have quite good water-soluble carbohydrate content, quite good protein, but high crude protein. Yeah, I can imagine. So you would only use it as a supplement, not as the main feed, I think.
Here in India now it's growing.
Yes, as the main feed.
Supplement.
Supplement, yeah. It would be too high quality for. It'd be like your soybean meal, too high quality to feed as.
Research was going on to replace the protein feed ingredient.
Yes, with Azolla. Yeah, so replace soybean meal with Azolla. Yeah, I mean, Azolla, you can watch it grow across the pond in warm conditions. It's unbelievable growth. Yeah, so it can be very efficient. A good supplement, not a good main feed. You'd want rice straw or something as a main feed. Okay, so yeah, different grazing systems. We can have rotational grazing systems to maintain clovers in our pasture. We can take it one stage further. We can actually give cows just a strip of grass each day, move them each day. That allows for very effective rationing. We can move the cows on each day. So you could do this with a cut and carry system as well. I know a lot of your dairy cow feeding systems are based on cut and carry, I think, aren't they? Rather than pasture grazing. And we can take that one stage further and have a paddock grazing system where the cows move around lots of little paddocks. Now, you might split the cattle into 2 groups, and say the high-yielding cows move ahead of the low-yielding cows, or the cows that need a lot of good feed, you put them into the paddocks first, and then another group of cattle, say your heifers or something, they might come in second because they don't need as much feed, and that can work quite well. So I think probably we should break for lunch. Is that right, Dr. Prasenjit?
Sure.
Yeah, questions? Yeah, sure.
Yeah, like I know in India we usually have this cut and carry system, but in pasture lands, how do you monitor the feed intake, or if there are any specific nutritional requirement for or say a group of cows, then how do you service that?
Yes, yeah, good question. You can monitor the grass availability, so you can measure the grass height, and there are various meters to do that. But essentially the cow is, you're relying on the cow and your knowledge of how much grass she needs. In the West, we would say that a cow needs 8 to 10 centimeters of grass underneath her feet to be properly fed, to produce those high milk yields. And in fact, the really high milk yielding cows, the really high producing systems, they don't have any grazing like this. The cows are inside all the time. And that's a growing trend in Western production systems. Cows are inside all year round. And that just increases the potential lameness problems, mastitis problems. But it's happened. And I remember 20 years ago, I was asked to go to a meeting in the UK, and they said, what are going to be the big welfare problems in the future? And I said, it's going to be year-round housing, because people are moving, or they're going to move to year-round housing because they've got control of the production system. And it's happened. Not only that, but the farms have got really big. I don't know if you have that here, but we have now farms being established in Europe, to a lesser extent in Australia, in the Middle East, 8 to 10,000 cows. Massive farms with about 1,000 or 2,000 cows in each barn. So fully housed systems. Feeding a mixed ration. So there'll be some grass, some concentrates, some minerals and vitamins, all mixed up together and fed out to the cows every day. It'll come here, I'm sure, if it hasn't.
It was proposed in 2010, but we got it stopped.
Okay.
That was my first project.
Oh, right, well done. Well, yes. On the grounds of animal welfare?
Yes.
Yeah. Welfare can be really bad in those systems. You can look at some of the European systems, and the welfare of the cows is just appalling.
Can it also be really good though?
Yeah.
It can be good, yes.
ये हमारे यहाँ तो 16 to 20 years है Indian breed. और lactation 8 to 12 or
We also got it stopped on the environmental grounds because the amount of dung in urine
Yeah.
and water
waste
utilization would be just
Yeah.
enormous.
Yeah, it's a real problem. I mean, in Holland now, they have to cart feces from one end of the country to the other because they don't have enough land. Most of the cattle and pig units are around the ports, at Rotterdam in the north, because all the grain comes into Rotterdam from America. And so they build all the cattle units and the pig units around the northern ports. They have to cart feces to the south because they don't have the land to put it on. It's crazy.
But that's good biogas input.
Yes.
Import and make biogas.
Yeah, we have of it.
There's only one problem.
Our own herd.
Exactly. We have so much unused
We
manure.
have so much already.
But why aren't we doing biogas?
Yeah, so biogas is now, everybody's exploring that. Government has started to offer subsidies in the last 5 years. So, but it has to grow more and more, more smallhold. We need to have more models where a smallholder family can also
पर सर
have a
हमारे
biogas
हिमाचल
plant.
में बायोगैस प्लांट सक्सेसफुल नहीं
जो इसलिए कि आपको वहाँ ठंडे ही है ना।
हाँ ठंडे की वजह से
लेकिन
बहुत
अभी
सब्सिडी दी गवर्नमेंट ने उन्होंने लगाए भी एक तो वो ठंडी है और दूसरा उसमें लेबर करनी पड़ती है
लेबरिंग ज़्यादा है।
लेबरिंग ज़्यादा है
नहीं, आजकल
He said
तो
it wasn't
models are
successful when he
getting
It's too cold.
But,
Mm.
at least if you
It's
see
the trouble.
the,
It's the same in Holland. It's too cold
renewable
for
use states
biogas.
in the country, at least 6 states are such where the conditions are conducive to biogas establishments.
I think
It's just that they're saying that it's very difficult to maintain, so they're still trying to crack that why what difficulties are there and how to overcome.
It's very widely used in China.
yes, they're very successful.
Yeah, small units. Some of them, small units. Just
In fact, backyard units,
yeah,
almost.
handmade. But in Holland, it's It is too cold, really, for biogas
And
production.
the reason why they're not, successful in a lot of areas is because in rural areas where you see mainly large farms have been set up in rural areas. So what they're doing, they're sending all the dung to the fields. They're making a slurry and
Yeah.
they're sending all the dung to the fields. So then a lot of farmers who have the resources and the kind of labor which is required to maintain it, then they're not interested in an additional work that it would create. But the government is encouraging it.
So they need the fertilizer. They need the
Yeah.
need it as fertilizer.
The smallholder farmers are then, because they use cow dung cakes as fuel.
Yeah.
So they do not have spared dung really from their cattle to put into biogas plant.
Well, there is a friable product at the end of biogas production. There is a solid product at the end.
Yes, which can be used as manure.
Yeah, or for burning maybe.
Or even burning.
Burning, I don't know. Yeah.
So the best part of this is why it, I think, is more feasible right now, is that now the biogas can be liquefied, stored and transported. So
Yeah.
you have a centralized space.
Okay.
You can do all this, just replace your CNG, etc.
और उसके लिए बहुत ज़्यादा कैपेसिटी चाहिए एनिमल्स की.
नहीं, but if Netherlands is unable to, or even we are unable to handle our extra stuff, then we can do it here.
They are doing it a bit. I mean, I visited a farm in Estonia, which is further north than the Netherlands. It's northeast. Really cold in winter. And the European Union had given them, I forget how much, it was $2 million or something to establish a biogas plant on this dairy unit. Unbelievable. So, and it was working, but some of the gas, of course, was used to heat the slurry.
It has to. It has
Yes.
to work on a feedback system.
Yeah.
So you start the plant with energy from outside, and as soon as you start burning, part of it gets fed back into heating the slurry.
Yeah.
Which is what actually should be done in the Himalayas as well.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, so it can be done. Yeah. But the infrastructure was so expensive. Unbelievable. Yeah. Why spend 2 million euros or something putting this plant in? And incidentally, on that farm, the welfare of the cows was appalling, I thought. They were so thin, so many sick cows. And it was an interesting example of intensification gone wrong, I think. So the farm manager, they'd set up this big cubicle shed, with lots of cubicles for the cows to lie in, and in this really big shed, and up near the roof, they had put this room for the farm manager to sit, and he had all these video screens to watch, and he would sit there, lording it over all the cows, and their welfare was appalling. He never left that room, it was obvious, and I thought, if this is what cow production has come to, that's really bad. It was terrible. But, yeah, good biogas production. Good.
So let's break for lunch.
Yes, yes. So don't go down that route of intensive.
No, I know that's for sure.
Yeah, and there are probably about 3,000 cows on the farm, I think.
We do have up to 4,000, between 4 to 5,000. But we are trying, the entire work that we are doing at World Animal Protection is about promoting sustainable systems and telling
Yeah.
them what's wrong with intensive farming.
Yeah, good. Yeah. Well, I mean, I suppose it was sustainable if you keep bringing new cows in, and it was profitable. That's the worst thing, because, these cows, they would produce 50 litres a day for a year or two, then they'd be killed, and there would be some meat from them. But if your milk price is quite good, then it's a profitable system. So you can have a sustainable system which has very poor welfare.
Do you mean environmental sustainability or do you mean economic?
No, it's a sustainable system because if Sustainability, the dairy farm sustainability in India also has a social aspect because we don't kill the animals directly. So what do we
Right.
do with the male calves and you know, if we have animals being discarded after 2 or 3 lactations, what do you do with those animals? Like, you know, the animals raised at a commercial dairy farm are of certain genetics, are crossbreds, which cannot be maintained by the small farmers because their nutrition requirement and other veterinary requirements are different from what the farmers know how to raise or, you know, what they can afford. So it's overall, like, you know, if you see the entire social, economic, environmental context together, it's not sustainable to have farms up to say a certain size. Maybe we say that like, you know, what AMUL or NDDB estimates is like something like a 200 to 50 cattle farm would be like a large size farm for India.
Yeah. But who regulates the socioeconomics? That's or the sociopolitics of it. That's the problem.
But at this moment, nobody, I suppose.
Yeah, that's what I'm working
But
on.
well, that's probably your work. But nobody does right now. But if you want to be successful in dairy farming in India, you have to adopt those strategies. This is very clear. Because society otherwise will reject.
Yes. How does it do that? I mean, I can see that it could do it here in India. In the West, you know, society has no role because the dairy farms are quite removed from society.
Yes, so in the West, like as you said during your speech, it's extremely centralized. It's extremely industrialized.
Yeah.
So the person who goes to the market sees only a carton of milk.
Yes. Yeah.
Here it is not so much.
No.
You know, it is decentralized to a very large extent. So even a lot of people, population, they see cows, they see milking. Even today, I think in villages, a cow comes to the house to be milked by a farmer or a dairy farmer.
Amazing.
Yeah, it is amazing. So those natural systems still exist in the
Yes.
country.
Yeah.
And SART say like about 70% of India's milk production is still into smallholder.
Yeah.
Only 30% which is now growing and is a problem for animals, including all these dairies inside and outside the city areas where the welfare is first.
And do you think the welfare is of that 70%?
No, there are different issues. There are different welfare issues. For example, round-the-clock feathering, or no availability of you know, water for 24 hours. There is no water. Only twice bucket feeding of water is there. Plus, obviously, feed is a problem. Like the government is focusing a lot on crossbreeding, but at the same time, farmers are not given skills or the resources to serve the needs of that enhanced high yield.
Yeah. This is the problem.
Following traditional practices.
And it was one of the things we looked at first, I think, was the enormous food requirements for a high-yielding cow. You know, we had 100 kilos, 120 kilos of food every day. It's a lot to cut and
This can be only done in a centralized place.
Yes.
At an industrial scale.
Yeah. I guess so, yes. You can't cut and carry on a bicycle that amount of food.
Maybe one of the reasons why the current government is going back, like, you know, like for 10 years there was an intensive crossbreeding program in the country, and now they're going back to native breeds, is because now there is a realization of the problems that we have created, and especially related to sustainability.
But that's been happening, you know. I mean, the British started introducing the high-yielding Friesians back in the 1940s, didn't they? And people were saying then, you know, these cows are prone to disease. They're, you know, they get lameness problems. They don't last very long. Why is it taking so long to recognize the value of traditional breeds?
It's now only it's coming, because I would blame the West only, because in 1970s when the crossbreeding program started, the genetics were first imported from there.
Oh, it started a long time before that. 1940s they started crossbreeding.
So 1970s there was this white revolution, and there was this focus on improving the breeds and getting more milk. And now I I think India is in a tricky situation because we are world's largest, world's biggest producer of milk, and then the country wants to maintain its position. So
well, you've got the most dairy cows. You've got the most dairy cows.
We have got the world's largest herd also, dairy herd.
You got the biggest dairy herd. I don't think you're the biggest milk producer. I thought.
India is also the top milk producer.
Is it?
First.
Yeah, it's a
Okay.
top milk producer as well with the largest number of cows.
Definitely the largest number of cows in the world. Yeah.
So it's also the top milk producer now.
55% will come from the Rotational.
Yeah, 55%. I'm not sure
Yeah.
about 55%, but we have more buffaloes. No, we have more cows. Yeah, so that's the reason that Milk Revolution 1 and 2 and now the National Dairy Plan that we have,
Yes.
it also focuses on getting more milk and improving the breeds.
Yeah. And I'm sure they're looking at some of these intensive systems which I've outlined because it's happening all around the world. And it's often supported by the West. Holland will go out and say, okay, this is how you milk your cows through our machinery and at very high cost. And then the Irish will come in and say, yes, and you need one of these mixer wagons which will cost you another $20,000.
It's much more profitable converting money, making machines.
Yeah.
Per dollar, if you put in $1 to make a machine, you make $1,000 when you sell it.
Yes.
So it doesn't make sense to sell milk.
No. Well, it means you're trapped in a system, aren't you? Whereas previously, the cow was intimately involved with the people, which has its problems, and we'll talk more about that on the last day, I think. But when I was listening to you saying at breakfast this morning about your close connection with the cows, I thought this is a really positive system. The welfare of the cows is good. Your welfare is good because you're happy with the cows. The people that are working in these big units, they can't be happy with it. The cows aren't happy. Maybe the only people that are happy are the consumers who want to drink lots of milk, but very cheap milk. Buy their videos and spend the money.
And go to a supermarket and buy cartons rather than
Yes.
waiting for the dairy farm.
But I'm not sure if the consumers in India fully know what goes behind doors and how we're treating our cattle, because we just think we are born with the genes to treat animals right, but things have changed, how they were, and not all consumers. I'm sure if there was better awareness about that, how the good farming systems look like, we would have considered that way. Like before I came into animal welfare, I've always seen a cow tied and I didn't know what are the welfare issues associated with it. I just thought that's how it is done. And I think it's like if we give better education, cheap milk, definitely. People want cheap products, even if we introduce welfare. But yeah, I think maybe there is a section of society which will change once they know that what are the welfare issues.
Education will do much more than any research in improving animal welfare. I'm sure that's right.
And campaigns.
Yes, they work.
That's what worked in the West, I think, ultimately, and then came all the certifications.
Yeah, there's no doubt the campaigns have had.
There has to be a demand for certain.
Mostly liquid campaigning.
Yes. It's working much more than it used to. It used to be that the government said do this and everyone did this. But now there's much less power. I don't know how it is in India exactly, but the lobby groups have much more power than they used to. Yeah. So, yes, we must listen to Khushbu and yeah, good. Let's get some lunch. Good discussion.